To give you some context, this occurred roughly 14 years ago when I was 12 years old, living on the east side of an Australian rainforest. When I say rainforest, our house was on a 40-acre property surrounded by bush. The house itself was owned by a Swiss man named Hans. Occasionally he would come down with his tractor and cut all the long grass surrounding our house so that we could access slightly more of the property in the summer. It's also extremely handy because if you know anything about Australia, it's that we have tons of beasties that can very easily and quickly kill you. We lived about 40 minutes drive from the small town centre. This meant that if we needed groceries, medical attention, or to contact parents, say like if we were at school or whatever, it would be 40 minutes before we could do anything. The house sat on the side of a large mountain, roughly 3/4 of the way up, so naturally most of the land we called home was strewn with valleys, nooks, and hideaways. We had trails we could walk and they led to streams and small waterfalls, 5 to 6 meters. It was truly a mind-blowingly beautiful place, but considerably scary to me and my small siblings. One brother, one sister, both slightly younger than me. We knew the neighbors on both sides of our house, and it was pretty remote. Our nearest neighbor was roughly a 10-minute drive away. Lovely old lady used to wave to us when we got off the school bus before we made the trek home every day. I think our parents asked her to keep an eye on us, to be honest. The other was a middle-aged man and his family. Now, this guy was a real jerk. He excavated all the way around the bottom border of his property where our properties met and continuously interrupted the stream and waterfall's clear flowing water supply. Lots of strange and creepy shit happens when you're living in the middle of nowhere, but one particular involved guy I certainly do not want to meet again. Being pretty removed from people, it was extremely rare that we got visitors that we didn't know were coming. When people we didn't recognize turned up, it's usually because they were lost and needed directions or assistance. One day though, a man in a ute came roaring down our driveway. I remember running inside to tell my dad. Someone weird was here. He immediately walked outside and went to see what this guy wanted. So a little background on my dad quickly. He is literally the most hardcore dude you will ever meet. He's got one leg after having it amputated earlier in his life. Had a motorcycle accident while being chased by the police. He was in the Navy, and he was brought up in a very strict household. He grew up in a really rough part of Sydney's west, so he had some pretty shady contacts, to say the least, and in short, someone you really don't want to fuck with. I wouldn't be surprised if he killed someone in his life prior to having kids. Anyway, my dad goes outside to see what all the commotion's about, while my mum keeps us inside, being protective, as mums do. The man has a large red furred dog in the back of his car that looks like a German Shepherd cross. It snarled at my dad, but immediately cowered when this stranger told it to shut up. Our dog, Millie, renowned beast killer just for the record, was snarling and going ballistic while being chained up in the house. Hi, my name's John. The way this man spoke was like he was a salesman. He was slick, smooth guy who on the outside seemed friendly, but with an overtone of wanting something. My dad immediately responded with, "So what the fuck are you doing up here then, John?" The man was taken aback, obviously not used to dealing with someone as hostile as my dad. They then talked for a while, and I could hear my dad talking with a sense of confusion about whatever this man had to say. I did, however, overhear my dad say, "What the fuck are you thinking? Just call the cops." I found out later that the lovely old lady next to us had died. Apparently, John was on the other side of her property and went to visit and found her dead. He also asked my dad if they should move the body to make it easier for the police to investigate. This is obviously why my dad was telling the man to call the police immediately. Anyway, later that night, the police showed up to take a statement from my dad and John, who was hanging around at our house, until the police arrived. I remember my dad pulling an officer aside and explaining that John wanted to move the body when he first arrived. The police left without any more questions, as it looked like she had died from natural causes. John was still at our house. Now, I found him to be a really unsettling person. The way he smiled, the dark of his eyes, he was unfamiliar but acting like he was one of us. I remember it was a school night. I was trying to watch TV and he was playing songs on his guitar with my mum and dad at the table. Now I was angry because he was ruining my shows, and I told Mum I wanted him to go and that I thought he was weird. She smiled, told me that she felt the same and that I should just go to bed. The next day, things seemed normal. Went to school, came home. Not seeing the familiar friendly face of the old woman stung a bit on the way past her house. Felt strange, and I hoped that she knew her family loved her before she passed. I was a bit sad on the walk home. Until halfway down the drive, I noticed John's ute again parked out the front of our house. I walked closer and was greeted by his dog, Rusty. He walked outside with my dad, and I heard him call Rusty to his car as he was leaving. Apparently, he was borrowing tools from my dad. He left and waved goodbye like he was someone that I was going to miss. Again, that sense of over-familiarity made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know this man. I didn't like this man, and I was hoping he would never come down our drive again. Anyway, so my dad then pulls me aside and he asked what I thought of John. I labeled him as a weirdo and told my dad I was hoping he wouldn't come back. For the second night in a row when John returned Dad's tools, he was sitting in our house playing guitar and annoying everyone. My mum and dad were visibly unimpressed by the situation. I heard my mum and dad argue about him hanging around until eventually my dad told him he needed to leave, as it was time for us to go to bed. He insisted it was early and tried to make an excuse to stay. I found this very odd. I was polite enough to know when someone didn't want me to be around, so why didn't this man? Or if he did know, why wouldn't he leave? After ushering him out, my mum and dad had a big talk in their room, and my dad told us all that he didn't like John and that he was going to ask him to not come over anymore, and if we saw John again, to immediately tell him. The next day was a Saturday, so we were going to blow up our cheap inflatable pool and go for a swim as it was starting to get pretty warm. Around 11 a.m., the sound of a car thundering down the driveway alerts me, and I go outside. I run back inside, tell my dad John is back. Just like the first time I ever laid eyes on John, my dad goes outside and we stay inside, watching with my mum through the screen door. John again, with his weird over-familiar smile and dark eyes, greets my dad and is met with, "Look mate, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't want you around here anymore. You scare my kids and my wife, and I don't want you to come back. Do you understand?" I didn't hear John's reply, but from his tone it sounded like he was confused and tried to reason with my dad. Dad wasn't having any of it and told him to go or he'd call the cops. As he was leaving, Dad said, "Don't come back, or you'll be sorry." This is where things truly get weird. As my dad lays this subtle threat on the man, his face completely changes to one of rage. He glares at us in the house, sticks up his fingers, and speeds out the driveway, shouting profanities and churning up gravel, spraying it towards our house. My dad came back and told us we wouldn't be seeing John anymore, and if we did, we were to call the police. I was relieved. This odd man made me feel uncomfortable in my own home, and the way he reacted when he left confirmed the feeling I got from him when I first saw him. I can't remember if it was the Sunday or the Monday after that day, but John did come back. He tried to reason with my dad and say sorry for whatever caused us to not like him. Before I even got out of the ute, my dad said, "If you don't turn around and leave, I'm going to smash your face in." He did just that. My dad then called the police to inform them about what happened. Apparently, they were going to go and talk to John. I didn't hear any more of what happened of that conversation. A few weeks went by with no sightings or happenings with John, and we all felt like things were back to normal. This was all before our mailbox was knocked to the ground and smashed, or possibly run over. I remember asking my dad what happened, but he wasn't about to give me any ideas. He later told me that he knew it was John after the way their last conversation ended. The next weekend, after the mailbox incident, we went into town to get groceries and fast food for dinner. A bit of a treat. And when we came home down the driveway, my dad immediately stopped my mum from proceeding and said that something was wrong. Next to the carport, where we parked our car at the back of the house, there was a window that was open to the bathroom. My dad must have spotted the window was missing as we drove down. He got increasingly more tense until we noticed the window was missing. I remember being confused in the back seat, not really knowing what was going on until I saw it. A man, dark eyes, overfamiliar, coming from that window that led to the shower. My dad was exploding with rage. He told my mum to rush down the driveway so that we could fuck this guy up. The man proceeded to escape the window and run down the back of our property into a thick latana, like a really thorny shrub-like plant. My dad, only being on his one leg, let Millie loose as she was going ballistic tied up to the house. She raced down to the bush, engulfing the hill into the darkness. She came back with nothing. My dad went out with his flashlight and couldn't find anything either. I'm not sure if anyone slept that night. None of our possessions had been stolen or even moved. We must have caught this man just as he was entering our house. The police came the next day and searched for fingerprints with no avail. My father was furious and again alerted them to John and his strange behavior. They told us they would look into it once again. That was the last thing we heard from John that year. I had almost completely forgotten about him and had the summer off to enjoy myself, get ready for high school. The school I went to is pretty large considering where we were, but everyone seemed to know each other pretty well, including all the teaching staff. Within my first week at the school, we were introduced to all of the teachers and to the teachers' aides. I was caught completely unaware when that over-familiar, dark-eyed man from the previous year was reintroduced as a teacher's aide. Except instead of John, he was now introduced as Gregory. I went into a little bit of a spin. I was trying to make sense of it all. I was 100% sure that this man named Greg was the same man who had introduced himself to my family as John. At that moment, so many things rushed into my head. What if he killed the old lady? What if he didn't live close by? What if he wanted to move the body so he could frame my dad? If he lied about something as critical as his name, what else is he lying about? What if police never ever made contact with him? I was sitting there for a good 10 minutes trying to piece it all together until the teacher called my name and brought me back to reality. That's when he noticed me. The look on his face when he saw mine was one I'll never forget. He immediately recognized me. He looked shocked. His eyes were wide and he said nothing, just staring. I had just found his dirty little secret. I could sense that he was now the one feeling uncomfortable and on edge. Later that day, I rushed home to tell my dad who I had found. He was shocked and repeatedly asked, was I sure? He went to the school the next day and discovered the man had put in for indefinite leave the day before and may not return. When we heard of the news, my dad told me to watch out and let him know should John or Greg ever return. So, John, Greg, whoever you are, let's not meet again.